geekiest part of LucasArts that does Star Wars, etc., bought by Disney. Because it is part of Disney and everything that, I mean, not during COVID, obviously, but everything that the whole sort of theme park thing can do, combined with video games, combined with storytelling, film, etc., that has triggered my mind as lot in terms of what that can come to mean with technology. This being said, long before I heard about story living, I worked with a lot of storytelling myself and integrating this in a lot of different artworks. And well, we all live our own stories in terms of justifying who we are, etc. But in the center, you see this piece, "The world will change as I hold my breath." It's part of an exhibition that was exhibited at Färgfabriken in Stockholm in 2016. On the left, you just see myself on a graveyard in London, and then everything merges together, which is like a main theme of this presentation. So data is the scaffold of all digital experience. I mean, data to some extent is the scaffold, even if we don't really call it data, because that's, I mean, whatever we would break down all potential content into. But throughout the presentation, I would like to make a little bit more sense about what this data could be. Not very technical, because I'm a lot more concept than technology, although I do work with both. These are the 6 things that I would like you to be noting down meanwhile we are going through the presentation. But you don't have to do it now. There will be triggers going through this presentation. But these are some of the main components that can make up whatever type of experience I'm thinking we could be talking further about later on. Everything's about sort of framing life, right? That is how we create the little myths, whether it's who we think we are, or what we want to sell, or who we want to meet, etc. So who am I? I can do the like little traditional presentation, which is ridiculous, but was born here-ish. This is actually from the same premises, probably not the same building. I was born in like in the mountains in Himalayas in 82. That is a story I've been told. Obviously, I have no memories of it. Raised by this person, trained and raised. My mother calls herself a priestess, a shaman, or a witch. I don't feel, I mean, to me, it's just a mom, but evidently that impacts what training and upbringing you get. Also have had a lot of art people in my family throughout the generations. I don't know before this, it's an amalgamation of a family, so I don't really have much of a family tree by traditional means, not a very trackable one anyways. But the painting here in the center is glassworks my great-grandfather did in Germany. More importantly, what I'm about is bringing a slice of the future into the present. And I realized I misspelled bring in the beginning. I just totally gone bananas with the embellishments, so you have to bear with that part. But that is, I think, is from all perspectives interesting, because bringing more of the future to the present is also a way of bypassing more consumption, basically, more like avoiding more production for all the in-betweens, and also having more of sort of what the humanity strives for sooner, and just trying to maximize that rather than profit has always been my thing. That obviously works against yourself in terms of profit being a good thing for sustaining your life, but yeah, just getting more of it is really my own passion and what I'm trying to do until I get bored of it in a company, or no one else seems to understand me anymore, and that's the end of that journey. But that really is my main purpose throughout the things I do. I also often speak about interfaces to human experience as whatever I'm working with. It has originally it was fashion, then I very quickly got tired of fashion, or mostly people in fashion, I think, because I think the embellishment of the body itself is pretty interesting continuously. But also the whole thing of having to change things rather than upgrading things. I was always more interested in technology from that perspective, because you normally change things either because they're broken, and hopefully we can make quite resilient objects if necessary. But otherwise, in fashion, you just shift things because you don't really relate to them anymore. But that is also a little bit of our own failure in not building a character we want to be and trying to be something someone else projects on us, right? I mean, that doesn't mean that you have to weave your own clothes, but it does mean that if you're building a character, you will be consuming less because you have more of a focus. And so in that sense, I think style is more interesting than fashion, but that is kind of a different chapter. Anyways, I was briefly in fashion once upon a time at St. Martin's and Gaultier, etc. So what I've been working more with is stories of anticipated futures. And really early on, I started working with ideas of what would it be like if the surface of garments were artificial intelligence who could only communicate with one another by changing visually, so that they had their own visual language that was completely different from the wearer, for example. Those sort of ideas were absolutely not anywhere near plausible at the time, so it was very much concept. Also worked a lot with the kaleidoscopic functions, got totally into the whole thing of the 17 two-dimensional symmetries that exist, that it's like sort of an edge of reality where there are mathematical limitations to how many symmetries there can be in a certain number of dimensions and things like this. Obviously, I'm absolutely no mathematician, although I realize the more I work with game engines that that would have been excellent to be. Then I would probably not be myself in most other ways, so that would probably have been counterintuitive by those means. So what I do work with now is XR, or extended reality, also commonly spoken about as spatial computing, etc. Most people just think about virtual reality or AR, where you're just holding up a phone and looking through that. But I am also looking at the perspective where that is happening. And extended reality was pushed out, as a lot of these things are like in science, you often speak about market pull or technology push. And yeah, well, technology is very much being pushed out. But when you see how multiple of these streams converge and the possibilities these technologies together will enable, it's very easy to believe that extended reality in one form or another, if you see these sort of Facebook Connect events, which used to be called Oculus Connect, you see how much research is being pushed into making extended reality part of everyday life. You may love or hate Facebook, which is totally up to each one of us to pick sides if necessary. But that sort of technology makes a lot of sense. And if not used for advertisement, that amount of data is really what you want for creating any technologies that are digital, because the data will be able to do, well, that will be able to activate every type of thing that cannot be activated without the data. I think personally, you should be having a share of that data and choose how it is being used. But without it, it will be completely, a lot of digital experiences of the future will be pretty useless or very not interesting. Although it could obviously be stored like things on this special chip on Apple devices and shared on a need-to-know basis, etc. So back to an old work of mine, but it correlates with how I'm thinking about extended reality and virtual realities. This is from the same exhibition at Färgfabriken in 2016, where this is actually just a scene that looks as if there are 3 people in the black room in VR experiences, a bit stolen from the whole look we saw in the old The Cell movie. But the whole idea of entering into your own mind, based also on narratives, which is essentially how hypnosis works, that is very similar to virtual reality, although obviously not replicable exactly the same visual way in each mind who goes through the experience. I've done multiple artworks using hypnosis, and primarily to guide people through artworks that only exist in that person's mind. I think there are certainly benefits to that compared to virtual reality, because it uses the sort of same backdrop as dreams do. It's also a lot less technically advanced, but combinations of these things are interesting, and most spiritual practices or techniques for achieving experiences of spiritual magnitude, let's say, whether you're religious or not, you can have experiences that are very impactful. They are very often using either breath or some type of hypnosis, whether sailing under that flag or not. So one of the first things I want you to write down is, if you were to create an experience, where would you want it to be created? So if you could choose any location, write it down or remember it. But also think about the fact that spatial continuum is something that we also need to be thinking more about. If you're thinking about digital creations, digital content, more and more where you are can be multiple places at once, in that you can be virtually somewhere and physically somewhere, and that is kind of a continuum, and you may be in whichever country, in whichever building, and also in one or multiple digital spaces at once. You probably are already, while in a sort of flatland way at the moment, using smartphones. Maybe you're just now not listening and chatting with someone, for example, or you're going through 5 different chats at once at other occasions while sitting in the living room or on a train or whatever. That is sort of the flatland version of a spatial continuum. It's obviously not spatial, but it is a sort of physical digital continuum. So we don't need to call it spatial continuum. We don't need to call it a new where either, but it is something that hasn't existed previously. I don't know how much VR experience you have, if any. Some of it is not great at the moment, or not quite yet, but it certainly becomes so much better all the time. And as soon as it's really good enough and really well widespread enough, you will have experiences that weren't even possible in the past. And that will change a lot of things. It's not the Zoom call we're having right now. We would all be in the same space, for example, and you could be with all your friends and I'm with all my friends, and we only see the people who are on a need to know basis, for example. Second element to write something about is time. Where and when would you want to create an experience? In the future, in the present, or in the past, or as in an experienced past, obviously. With digital experiences being spatial and immersive, then we have to start thinking about the sort of how these arcs of content play with each other, right? Whether it's for marketing or entertainment or communication, or even just scheduling things in your diary. These arcs can come to play a totally new role, because for example, if, well, now I can't see any of you, but if I were to meet one of you guys sometime next week, and it doesn't really matter when, we just have to have a chat about something. In this sort of a story system, if our diaries match for us to meet in a way that we don't plan, but it matches our schedules, then it can form part of a story, even if that story doesn't, every element of a longer story doesn't need to be super interesting, but everything would be smoother tied in. I don't know if you have ever been to Las Vegas. There's like a menu of stuff you can do there, but everything is stitched together so poorly it feels like you are doing the logistics that you really don't want to be doing. You have to see it's a little bit like experiencing the back end of the system rather than the front end. It's a really good book about filmic realities I read well, it's probably a decade ago. But it basically speaks about, we've seen so much film, so much media, and now it will also include, for many, having played a lot of games, etc., that we come to expect things and content from these fictional devices in our lives, even though they aren't real, they are fictional. But because we've seen so much of it, they form part of our expectations and of our lives. So they are part of our lives, even if we don't really could expect to have those types of experiences. And with more digital technology, more of those sort of experiences can be tied into life to be experienced, even if they're not fully real, they're real enough for an experience. This way of thinking obviously goes way back to other older things. I Ching is one of the first, if not the first, divination system that they used in China 5,000 years ago, maybe more. Different books say different things about that. But essentially, it is a system that is divided into hexagrams and trigrams, and there are 64 different hexagrams with special outcomes per hexagram. So the number of different type of paths, essentially types of changes you could experience, is in the multiple hundreds. And it's pretty funny because old Chinese compasses have these the same system baked into it. So wherever you come from to wherever you're going is forming part of what they basically spoke about, somewhat like time molecules. Not saying this is true, but the way of thinking about as story devices and how you operate in life based on these sort of story devices is absolutely an ancient thing. And we're doing it today, sometimes based on data, sometimes based on whims, doesn't really matter. What you also see sort of fading into this picture is this truncated octahedron. Actually, I don't remember if that's the real name for it. Anyways, this big geometric shape was part of an artwork I did ages ago, which included an actress, this sculpture, me inside of that sculpture, a mind machine, which is sort of a diode system that flickers light onto your eyes so you get fractals in your mind, and breathing exercises, hypnosis. Sorry, actually, I don't know how to go back on this one without going out of the whole presentation. Sorry about that. Anyways, got a bit carried away here. The artwork, anyways, called Entrance Not for Everybody, would have the actress lure a stranger in a group setting. This was exhibited at Konstfack as part of my master thesis project. If she got well along with someone in the group exhibition, she would invite them into the sculpture, which meant she opened a section of the sculpture, rolled out a bed, the person would have to lie down, put this sort of blindfold looking thing over his or her eyes, and that was the mind machine that would be turned on as they slid in with the bed into the structure, and they would then be experiencing fractals in their own minds. I would later turn this off and start a breathing exercise, and then put the person into a state of hypnosis, and then basically go through sort of a mixtape of yogic mental practices, after which they were given a gift as to sort of reinforce the experience. So I was working with mnemonics in the sense that strong experiences are things that we normally remember, but also repetition is the main way of remembering things. And that's why I used a gift that was interesting enough for no one to really throw it away, probably, because it was quite complex and expensive looking. And by having such an object in your home, or even just for a while, you would reinforce the memory by retelling yourself what had happened. The object was also strange enough for people to want to ask about it, so that you would more frequently have to talk about it, and therefore reinforcing the memory over and over again. A third thing to write down is an event. You have a time, you have a place, whether it's physical or digital or somewhere in between. But if you were to tie in two events you would like to collide, or two events that you don't understand how to marry, that would be very interesting to see how we could together shape a bridge across those two events through an experience. Maybe impossible, but curious to hear your thoughts. And with whom would you want this experience to happen? Maybe you're not involved at all. Could be two fictional characters, or two digital characters, two artificial intelligences, or two friends of yours, or a famous person and a character that only exists in literature. Whom would you add to this experience you are designing? Could also obviously be like a whole community. For ease of use, you can choose whichever. But this is also part of, I know you had a chat about, or the whole day on Monday, about identities in one way or another. My view is very much that because body tracking and augmented reality, etc., becomes so much more complex, very soon you can choose to be a different type of entity continuously, which makes a huge difference for people who feel they don't belong at the moment, because they're in the world where everything is enforced often to be male or female. This will not apply even across genders anymore. This will be just beyond. You will have children who have never been anything but some creature that someone happened to invent by their computer at some point, and embellish that character for the rest of their lives potentially, or be 20 characters simultaneously. These things are just going to explode, and some people will try to regulate away these things. Some people will want to control what they see so that everyone, it's just very anonymous and simple, and others will just go freaking all in, as with fashion always have been, basically. But you can then wear more than the surface layer. You can be any type of character. I can be a character for you and another character for my mom at the same time, because they will not have access to see the same things, for example. And how would you style your experience? Style is obviously so many different things, and relating back to the characters, like whether you want to live looking like a unicorn continuously, or be all in plant kingdom, or in an artificial candy show, or in a space that is abstract lighting alone. Style and aesthetics and how you shape things is always super interesting, but in the context of extended reality, every person in a household, for example, well, maybe you all live alone, but provided you probably have lived in a family at some point, what if everyone in the family saw something completely different in the same spaces? Because you could just choose the experienced materiality, if it was always active, if it was always passive. These sort of things become increasingly possible. It will also impact how we can have long distance communications, right? And how we can have windows into each other's spaces whenever we want to. I can have a balcony inside of your living room whenever we're talking, for example. And this will also impact how you play, where you play. We already see games that make use of these sort of things with the LiDAR technology on the new iPad, for example. And these things will just explode eventually, which is very fun. Maybe scary for some. And in creating experiences, we kind of need props. You can fantasize of everything and have sort of a solid experience from the convenience of a floating tank or your bathtub or whatever it happens to be. But for most people, props are making a huge difference. Just as props make a difference in theater, when you see things from a distance. If you're in a video game, obviously you wouldn't need to be holding a virtual sword. You could have the same effect without that sword, but that because neither the arm or the prop holding it is real. But both of these things are being made real and therefore experienced as such, right? Obviously, everyone has, or nearly everyone has, too much stuff anyways, but both virtual and real props, and probably things in the in-between spectrum of these two things, serve a purpose for creating experiences. I think every person, it's not really a prop, obviously, more of an agent or actor or whatever to call it, but there is basically nothing that isn't either a prop or an agent for experiences, in my opinion. And in the image here, we see traces of a few things. So this little sphere you see at the bottom is not actually a little sphere, but a huge sphere experienced in a VR artwork I did in 2017. The lady writing here above, that is a step ahead of seeing this sphere, which is experienced in a sort of winter valley scenery. So she's writing down something she wants to leave behind. That's the idea of it. It's basically like it's like when you go to church in a Catholic church and you want to tell the priest something. There's no priest here, obviously, but says something you leave behind. You write it down. You wrote it down. You threw it in the bin, and you stepped into the experience. And you could stay for as long as you wanted. This basically 20-meter in diameter big sphere was dropped in this valley and then tumbling around as if it was a pinball ball in real life, and you were just an observer. Meanwhile, this was tumbling around, and it had its own voice, not really saying anything, but making it more of an entity. And to the right here, you see what was a material sample with functionality, but no real purpose. It was basically to communicate qualities of this sort of paper plastic material made for a Swedish research company together with a former partner of mine. And it had a name from a book called Kofes. That's not the name of the book. It's the name of an object within this book. And it's like an object that is meant to have no resemblance to anything in particular. So it's basically an object that is an abstract. And in this sense, it was very interesting because it was always given away as a material sample with material use in mind. But everyone tried to picture this being something in particular. Everyone had like their own idea of what this object was. This is, by the way, a stack of like 20 of these objects. So beyond where, a location, a time, a when, two events, someone to someone or a few people or characters to create this event with, the styling, potential props. What would you like to feed this experience in terms of data? Is it biofeedback? Biofeedback hasn't been very interesting for most people, but it seems like it's going that way. I mean, you may have an Apple Watch or whatever that doesn't really do super much at the moment. We're seeing soon enough brain interfaces that read brain signals. I have friends running an AI startup, which basically trains on simpler technology like Apple Watches and more consumer-ish biofeedback gadgets. You can use more advanced medical training systems to compare with and the same type of experiences, and therefore simpler tools can tell more based on just crunching more data from more advanced systems in parallel, basically. So I think biofeedback is very interesting in that the future experiences this can create will help shape you to always feel better about yourself in one way or another. Obviously, if you hate technology, that will probably not help. But if you hate technology, you should probably not study what you're studying as well. So I hope you don't. But yeah, of course, you could argue that you would have to meet people where they want to be to some extent. But I think biofeedback has an insanely interesting potential of shaping content. At the moment, it's very much like you have to track something so that you get a score or something like that. That is very non-narrative based, which makes it a lot less interesting, but doesn't kill the potential of the technology. Because all this data, whether it's through food or dancing or shopping or whatever it happens to be, you're feeding a sort of causality system, right? Well, here you just see some snacks, which obviously isn't the best data potentially. I think it will also be quite a while before you can actually track everything you're eating automatically without having to go into lists and stuff and do that work yourself. Not very interesting for that duration, I think personally, unless it can be through image recognition somehow. But at least keeping this in mind that whatever sort of data trail you're interested in, thinking of ways that could turn into a service part of a narrative. That makes a lot of sense. So I think the last part for you to jolt down would be a sort of data input output. Because that is somehow these factors, obviously you can add endless number of more factors, but for us to have something easier to digest and talk about with you guys, I think just having these 7 points or 6 points to talk about is a way of generating stories. I think eventually generating stories will have to be at least semi-automated because there will be so many stories to be part of, right? I think curation, certainly human curation, for as long as necessary and made interesting, makes most sense, but I don't think everyone's going to be a storyteller by any advanced means, just like most Instagram stories aren't that great. So I think maybe that could be polished by artificial intelligence, or maybe it should be generated mainly by artificial intelligence. I don't really have a stake in that at the moment, so I don't know which would be better. In the center, you see the text, "I notice only the flow, never the air," which was also part of the same exhibition. Memories of Air was actually called Subjective Suites and Memories of Air, where subjective suites was a number of artifacts all presenting a statement, such as this one here, which is a perspective of air that we consider or think of as part of air, but the actual air part of it is not really experienced. I think this is it. Yes. I'll jump back into our conversation. Ta-da! I hope it made some sense. I know I can be a bit all over the place, but I see no one on the screen, but feel free to talk.
You're hypnotizing.
Sorry, I'm of course happy to answer any questions, but I thought it would also be interesting to, like, beyond any questions, to me, start thinking about like what little mini systems you have sort of laid the ground for by writing your 6 little different parts, to see if we can like help each other ideate something maybe unpredictable from that. Because ideation is really one of my main things to play around with, and I think, well, I would be happy to play around with one of these concepts. If you have another concept you're already working with, also happy to play around with that in terms of ideation and sort of part of the dynamics.
There is one question from Pierre.
Sure.
Asking, what story do you live in?
I mean, at the moment, I don't know. Like in terms of, I live very locally, which I've never really done in my past. So I live in London. I don't know if that has been clear. I don't think I mentioned it now, so I don't know if it's been communicated elsewhere. Which planet I'm from? Well, I don't know. I think when I started my work, which is in a pretty square American architecture firm, people are very friendly, but they are also a bit square. I introduced myself as from the future, so this planet, but just like a little bit ahead. But sometimes I read people. I look like a Jedi on the first slide. Well, very well then. I suppose the Jedi of Southwest London representing. Yeah, I don't think. I think I just have a very grand interest in things that impossibilities, and therefore there's an interest in where technology can go, because I think technology is one of the easier types of future forecasting you can do. You can just read up the next impossibility, Casper. Well, obviously, I don't know what the next impossibility is. Making people get along across the spectrum would probably be the next impossibility. Not sure how much technology will aid in doing so. I think there are things we need to be dealing with ourselves, of course, as well. I mean, I don't know, maybe AI could be helping us see individual perspectives of others better by finding exactly the sort of way of communicating that perspective that we can relate to. I don't think we're very close to that, but I think it could be potential in the future, obviously.
Can I just ask you one thing?
Absolutely, anything.
So what's your definition of an impossibility, and is future not an impossibility?
Future as in a place to be is obviously an impossibility, in that you cannot be there more than mentally. as in extract things that inspire you from possibilities that are either close or not very close to become reality, right? I think a lot of future forecasting, either it's normally anticipation based. So even big data future forecasting, which I technically don't know too much about. I worked with an interface for it, but in terms of the actual algorithmic parts of that, I am quite useless. But I know from that company, if they're crunching hundreds of millions of websites, for example, you are crunching for future forecasting specifically, you're crunching what people are talking about more, and in order to see how anticipation is growing within a sort of a 5-year period or something like that. In terms of I've always gone more for like reading a bit about a few technologies and then just creating narrative around that, because I don't know. I mean, it's not like you actually know exactly what's happening just because you're using a huge data set. You can just get a sort of feel for new possibilities. So defining impossibility, I don't know, right? Like I think the singularity is a good example, obviously, where things change so fast that you can no longer have an idea of what's happening from one day to the next or from one moment to the next. Okay, now there's a lot of questions going on from other people as well. Sorry, does that answer your question? I'm sorry if it was a bit flimsy.
I think that was an answer.
It was an answer, indeed. Okay, is there any way you would like me to elaborate further?
I think people will get angry if I start, because it feels like just after your presentation, I would like to just keep you flowing for as much as possible, because it was quite hypnotizing and an interesting experience to listen to you and view your images.
Thanks. Yeah, I mean, you can ask me later if someone else comes in between. I can't actually see the chat, I think. They just pop in.
So I can help you. There are questions. Are we all going to die?
I think that is that has always been true, right? But in terms of from technological perspective, maybe later seems to have been the case for a long time already. But yeah, someone could fuck that up as well, seemingly, right? By other technology or ruining other technology. I don't know. But yeah, I think I don't know. I meet people all the time who are really into the singularity thing of wanting to live 1,000 years, or I think I settled for 150 maybe. I don't want to be immortal. I don't know that I can be 150. Maybe someone will have messed things up enough before. But it probably depends, right? I think you can have good reasons to want to become an eternal, and you can have terrible reasons. And also, if you're like, some people feel that it's just enough to live to the next week or to the next weekend. And I think there are more urgent things to deal with in your life than to think about becoming a millennial by actual measures.
Another question that came out is, how do you define communication?
Well, I mean, that would be between two or more individuals, right? I mean, obviously there's communication on whichever level between molecules in your body, etc. I think that will probably be interesting as communication when you can have a second immune system installed by nanotechnology. We're super not there at the moment, so it doesn't really make a huge difference. But I think communication by some form of conversation, whether that can be I mean, it doesn't really matter if there's technological telepathy or not. If you can make other people understand you better, that is good communication, I would say. by whichever means. Some people are less gifted with language than others, and that might not help them. But yeah, I think communication is by whichever metrics you would want it to be. It doesn't really mean a particular thing for me, and I hope it continues to expand for me as well. Yeah, it could be through a drawing, through a text, but it could also be through, I mean, I wish I could have showed you guys a video I made for work, but essentially everything I do is secret, so I'm not allowed to. Although, yeah, I think can't push it in that sense. But yeah, I think communication will change a lot with these sort of immersive tools as well, because a text message will not just be a text message in a boring way. It could be if you wanted it to be. I'm thinking if you were always immersed, a text message could be a note in your field of view, which is the least interesting type of use of extended reality. Or it could be your fucking virtual pet coming up to you and whispering you something, or like the facade of a building changing into that message, or whatever. Like, in terms of, that is what's part of this whole concept of story living, I think, is that whatever stories you're already involved in can be devices for communicating this further and more neatly than today. I think most people are fine with getting a text from whomever and lifting up the phone, etc. I think, but I think there's a good reason to leave the whole sort of screen-based device world in that sense, because it's really bad for the body. So in terms of ergonomics and sort of bringing back what the body can do to the way we communicate, collaborate, etc., I think that is one of the good reasons to sort of embrace future technology as well, because most people have a desk-based life, and that is really bad for the body. And we have like learned bad tools to communicate with something complicated like a computer, but then the tools have to become better and better, so the interfaces come closer to how we already operate, and that is going to be defining what a great interface is of both. Well, I mean, it's already like the more intuitive a device or technology is, the more useful it is, right? So I think it will just be more and more and more and more intuitive in that sense. And exactly what layer of humanity and technology and biology, etc., that sort of lands in is going to probably take on many shapes before we find something that that rules out others.
To build on this is a beautiful answer, and to build on that, there is a question on why does this provoke me? Like, I feel so scared of this, and this person preferred to be anonymous.
That's all good. You can be anonymous all you want. Yeah, I know some people. Yeah, I don't know. I just feel that this is amazing, but of course, I mean, it's not like I don't know the granularity of your fear and why it's a fear in you. I don't really know. Is it that it feels invading for you, for example? I mean, in terms of who owns your data, yeah, I agree. That is messed up. If you do, like, I would love to have a super great, perfect DNA test done, but who owns that data? You know, like, I'm not selling that at the moment. I'd be happy to have the best version of a DNA test to just learn more things about myself otherwise. The granularity of my fear, is that actually a question to me, or is that what I expressed?
Again.
No, sorry, I was just noting down some of your words. I find your way of putting words together very poetic, so I just wrote it down in the chat. But I did have a question that I noted there, because you mentioned about the different ways we could communicate with interfaces that are different from what we use today. And do you think something like neural link, like communicating through brain interfaces that read our thoughts and just beam them into another person's brain directly. Is that the sort of interfaces you mean for communication that use the body?
Not really, but I mean, of course, way down the line, I think something like that makes sense. But I think also by that time, it's always different if you don't grow up with the technology, right? I think if you think about what sort of the whole Gen Z thing compared to someone who grows up sharing mind with their sister, it's going to be a very different thing. And also, it's already different if you come from different cultures, right? If you come from a culture where the individual has a lot less importance than the society, then you have a different sort of way of dealing with everything. So if that forms part, like if you have shared thoughts and I mean, I think there are so many parameters of that type of existence that aren't clarified, justified, or even possible at the moment, right? Maybe you can feel that you're super connected to someone, but and that is an amazing feeling, and you can create some sort of collaborative flow, whether it is for professional or entertainment or just coziness or whatever. You can create this sort of direct flow between people, but the more tools there are for making that happen on demand rather than by accident or by hard to acquire skills across time, I think anything that helps those sort of experiences is great. But yeah, I think in terms of the exact interfaces, unless you work with developing a particular one, just foreseeing that it will be a Neuralink or something like that, it doesn't seem like it's super close at the moment. But yeah, it will be cool, obviously. But I think also if you think about interfaces in an immersive context, it is probably more like a combination of speaking, like you have a lot of voice interfaces of varying quality at the moment, but they will get better, obviously. But also reading brain waves, reading where you can control things with your gaze, as in where you're looking. But also in terms of gestures, like if you think sign language, for example, that it seems complicated, maybe if it's letter by letter, but it might be more useful soon enough, and maybe easier to learn as well because of this. And also choreography, because there will always be this if this then that sort of thing, right? That this happened and therefore this gesture makes sense, or this movement makes sense. So I think you don't want to step into VR and then have like a stand in a circle of buttons. Today, sometimes VR interfaces are like that, but it would be more interesting if it's contextual, right? You are doing this thing and therefore this thing acts as a button. Like I'm picking up this thing and therefore this happens, etc., etc. I think creating causalities that mix between physical and virtual objects, physical and virtual reality, etc., in terms of these stories, that is more of the interface that would be much closer in time than being able to beam thoughts to one another. Yeah, long answer maybe, but
Thank you.
Yeah.
Hi, Nandi. I have a question.
Hi. Sure.
Yes, our futurist, Mr. Future. So I would like to ask you, like, what do you think would be the responsibilities as a futurist?
I mean, you're not inventing things if you're a futurist. You are looking at what other people are inventing to see how these collide into becoming new types of experiences that may or may not have been figured out by the people who are inventing the individual technologies, right? So, I mean, before there was cell phones and someone invented a cell phone, you could probably think of having a wireless phone in your house that one day I can leave the house with this phone. Doesn't change. I mean, that is not the task of a futurist to do anything different about that, right? I think their responsibility will obviously be to try and inspire people to do more interesting things with things that will happen and invent things for the fun things of it, right? Of course, all devices of data collection and data use can be used for surveillance and selling you advertisement, but the same data can be used for fun things. So if the market is full of fun things and the world is full of fun things that uses this data, then you're doing a good difference, because otherwise it's only being used for negative things. Of course, if it could, I mean, you would have to be into law rather than futurism to make those actual changes in per society, I think. There's probably futurists who are into law. I'm sadly, or maybe, I mean, not sadly on my behalf, because I don't want to work with law, but but I can't really help in that frontier, I think, as of now. So I'm trying to inspire people to do fun things with technology and to think about, well, yeah, goods and services, whether physical or digital, that are more rewarding and are more flexible and fluid, like personalities as well.
Thank you.
What do you think is a responsibility of someone, of a futurist?
Then I will ask the students, what do you think? So everyone will start. I don't have a smart answer. Are you asking me or everyone?
Well, I was asking you, but it could be everyone, of course. Anyone
right.
Feels like.
Well, that was kind of my answer. Well,
I was thinking a bit the same. Oh, sorry.
Go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead, Pierre.
Okay, I was thinking about like the rules and regulations of it in the future and what you like possibly can do, like live out certain fantasies and stuff like that. What are your thoughts on that?
I mean, you can already do a lot of these fantasies in 2D, right? I mean, if it's playing a video game when you want to be a sort of rohypnol killer in GTA 6, or if you going to be, I don't know, or if you want to just solve puzzles or whatever it happens to be, there are so many things that you can do just less immersive today already. It could be by, I mean, you can experience things that are certainly not nice if just by reading books, right? It's just, and they are immersive to a great extent. It's just that you're not actually in them, but you're sort of in tuned with them if it's a good writer and you like the writer, for example. I think a lot of things are already in literature, to be honest. It's just not shareable other than through a book club or a conversation. So the author is authoring something that you can read and your friend can read it and you can discuss it. And yeah, sure, you could probably, if you're really into it, invent a live role-playing game out of it, but it doesn't really tie into your life. You would have to plan for that role play, etc. So I think that sort of story living concept would be that you and whoever is into one particular tune can be part of that as a sort of ongoing membership in life for as long as you want to. And then another experience will also tie into that, so that you will have multiple sort of storylines falling in. You have to some extent already, obviously. But I think the sort of seamlessness of experiences and services will be able to become a lot better than it is today. You're muted, I think. Okay.
So do you think we're gonna lose people into the VR worlds later? Like
leave, or what do you mean?
Yeah, are they not going to be in the real world anymore? Like just stay in the VR world? No,
I think it's just going to be, if you take every element of your phone into your life, and some of them will be spatial, some of them will be invisible, and some of them, and then you would just add 400 additional services that you don't have on the phone today, or whatever. I mean, it's more like that. And sure, if you're playing a game, sometimes you can be entirely in VR, but more of the time you will not be entirely in VR. And I think it will be more like virtual people, also real people, that has like a sort of if you think about like you have a temporary contract, for example. Could be something if it's, I don't know, it doesn't matter if it's blockchain technology or something else, but you could have temporary contract that, like, okay, you earn this number of credits for performing this mini action to this person. So you can subscribe to a service and someone else get paid for feeding you 5 seconds of content that just happens to work for the situation you are in right now. I think you can just reshape so many parts of society to work for more people simultaneously without having to have the same type of more strict regulations and the systems you have. So there will be space for more types of experiences in general. That is my guess. But yeah, I'm sure. I mean, I met people who have tried to stay like a week continuously in VR already. That seems to be not enjoyable as of yet. but I mean, sure, if you could be, I think if you're if you say that you're you live like your last few years in a elderly home and you are semi-mobile. I mean, if you think about where VR is going to be in 20 years time, that seems better. My grandma lives at home still, but she cannot travel. I put her in VR a few times, which is obviously different. But I mean, in terms of transcending space and time and being in different contexts, etc., like when you can just not really leave a room, I think that will be amazing for those reasons. I don't think you need to disconnect from physical life. You obviously have to take care of your body anyways. But yeah, I think the mind is very mendable, right? There are people who are just in their books. And yeah, they have to go.
I guess it can be kind of comparable to drugs. Some people use drugs to escape reality and doesn't really care about their, physical bodies in a way, just escaping to another world.
Sure, but there are also people who escape reality by just going to the gym. And then they are taking care of their bodies maybe, but they are escaping some other aspect of reality. So I think what to consider reality, it's just like a sort of set. I mean, there are sets of rules that are nature, which is like you have to survive to the next day. If you want to like have kids, you need to create that situation for yourself and feed and protect the kids, etc. If you don't want kids, you still need to survive yourself. I mean, there are like rules that are real rules, and there are other ones that are a lot more rules that are not real rules, that are actually like agreed reality rather than actual reality. I think we all are following many more of those rules.
I have a question. So you're talking about extended reality, and Victor also just mentioned about, like if we spend a lot of time in the VR world. So if I extend this to kind of immortality, say for example, a loved one has passed, and what is your opinion if this person's entire life, memory, data could be uploaded into the VR world so that we can spend time continuously with a lost one in this extended reality world? Are you for or against?
I mean, this concept doesn't tell us if that person still is an active consciousness or a recording.
Recording. Like if, let's say, my grandma has passed, if technology has allowed us to even be able to store every interaction I can have, or maybe combined with machine learning, that, okay, all the conversation I had, so it kind of stimulate this interaction I can have with my grandma in the VR world, just because I would love to I can't let go, basically, I want to spend more time with her. What is your opinion on this digital immortality? Should people spend time with that or not? And
that is not
the rest of you
think,
could comment on the chat as well.
I don't think that is immortality though, right? It is you having created the best possible version of a photograph of your grandparent, for example. I mean, of course, there could be situations where, I mean, I don't really have a stake in this concept, but I think for some people it could probably be useful, right? In terms of someone who has a bad situation in life, and instead of having to remember the grandma's voice or whatever, the person pops into your life as a temporary entity. but I mean, not being capable of letting go of things, that is obviously a problem for people anyways, long before technology, I'm sure, right? I mean, I'm sure people have killed other people just because they couldn't let go of some concept. I mean, that is, I mean, I think it could be used positively and negatively. And it depends on for which reasons you're doing it. I think that would go for, if that is like sort of an escape and not being able to tolerate the changes to life, or if it is actually like, I'm using this as a tool to overcome the problem, or actually this person's advice was always good. The recording of this person as like a knowledge base is relevant. I think there are so many answers to that question. I mean, you could certainly do it for the right or wrong reasons, for sure. But if it's not a conscious being, then it's literally more like an advisor. And maybe if you could get every type of advice from that person, mended to a much bigger database of many more great answers, and then maybe that answer shows itself to you through your grandmother or whatever, could possibly be helpful. But there will be other technologies going on at the same time that might be well, more useful or help that sort of thing, so that maybe you couldn't access the things if you're in a state where that would not be helpful, for example.
Thank you.
To prevent, yeah.
Maybe I can ask something if no one comes up. Because you mentioned before how, or in the beginning of your lecture, how strange this kind of space feels, the learning space of the Zoom meeting and, you know, the virtual school done this way. So I wonder if you have notes on yeah, how we can use technology to facilitate this kind of remote learning experience, you know, in an educational setting, the technologies that we haven't had already, and where do you think they could be headed in the future? Thank you.
I mean, I think the customized learning journey per individual in general is where it needs to be going, right? I mean, from whichever age you're starting. I mean, it's easy to be like, to look at the tools that exist today and feel that that it would be awesome to have had those tools when I was a kid already, right? So in terms of having access to ever greater tools, I guess the future is a good trajectory in that sense. But yeah, in terms of using things today that exist today, it's super hard to customize learning journeys per individual, specifically if you just have to feel your students to fine tune per individual, right? Like, I mean, I've been a teacher sometimes, and then it's amazing to have students, and you find really good communication with a certain percentage, and then there will be other people that you don't understand well enough how to teach. Probably that's been my experience. And I mean, that's sad. I ideally, if you're multiple teachers, one of the teachers would then understand that person better, and that would be all fine. But I think technology tools would probably be able to help at some point. I don't know how close we are to that, right? But in terms of, like, I think these sort of assisted learning journeys began earlier. I mean, if there was a non-intrusive version of an Alexa that learned how you learn or something like that, that would be great. If it's Amazon that's just going to advise you different products to buy as a result, that's not so great, even if it's also sort of someone else learns about you, but you don't get to reap the benefits. But I think that sort of thinking certainly has potential. I think I only semi-answer your question because I don't really have a better one.
Oh no, it actually gives another angle to it, which I really appreciate. You know, that perhaps the answer is not in the technology itself and what you do with it, but like just understanding learning itself in this personalized trajectory that the digital world can offer in whatever form can be a rudimentary technology that is available already. But thank you very much.
Yeah, I think a lot of people haven't really figured out the sort of 2D learning journey on screens. And also, I mean, I've done software training, obviously, from videos and stuff like that. I mean, that is always good. But as soon as you run into like, this is what I want an answer to right now, and you can, I mean, you could write to the person and you probably will get an answer nowadays, but it will not be like, might disrupt your whole day and you might get that answer a week later. But yeah, I think a lot of things are already so much better, but it is obviously a different beast to do everything on distance, because there is also something amazing about hanging out with people in the same room. And even if you just get along with one person out of 100 in that room, that is already, I don't know, it's not that bad odds, I guess.
Thank you.
Cool. Pebbles, I don't know if I have a question to everyone. I would have been curious to hear more about how individuals are thinking about creating narrative experiences. But so if someone wants to take the stage and tell me something, that will be amazing. But obviously I understand that can be a lot as well.
You have been like the oracle, like everyone is like asking you about the future, like you have all the answers.
I don't have all the answers. In fact, I just have ideas of what could be answers, but happy to share those, obviously. You can contact me elsewhere later if you think there's something in particular I could answer. I can try. I have no promises to offer, sadly.
Can you make a Nandi Oracle website or something so that we can just keep asking you questions and you can create a chatbot to reply to all of us?
So my only task is to write down every answer I have to every question I could ever imagine. If there's a book that rocked my mind, I mean, I have two favorite authors, very different. So one is Hermann Hesse. Nothing technological going on there, because I felt the same divide he speaks about all the time. So he basically has everything's about one part where it's like engulfing in life and living sort of normal life to the fullest, and there's another side in pretty much all the same books that is diving entirely into a life of spiritual depth and leaving everything worldly behind. So, which is a divide I've always felt myself and have to fight with. Yeah, so that's not my favorite book. Siddhartha is not my favorite one. I think the Glassbead Game and the Steppenwolves I like better, but yeah, Siddhartha is also one of his books. And the other favorite author is pure sci-fi, which is William Gibson, because he has always had very interesting takes on future forecasting. I mean, sometimes he made some amazing forecasts with some ridiculous side effects to it as well. So he had like a lot of writing about advanced immersive internet and sort of web-based military coups, etc., already in the early 80s. But there's also like an overestimate of how important fax machine paper would be, and there are no cell phones in that whole real world. So, but yeah, I think a lot of his writing is really interesting, and he also he doesn't care so much about plot, which is kind of fun. It's more about sort of creating a universe of potentials that is very different. And he's not very good with characters as compared to many other authors, but there's something about how he invents a language and a feeling for what the future city can be like that I really like. You were muted now, I think, Pebbles, if you were trying to say something.
I said like I'm agreeing to everything you say.
Everything
Whatever you're selling, I'm buying.
Well, I sell virtually nothing. I just
give me a pill. I take it.
Yeah, they're sadly all in London, those pills. But
I mean the Matrix one.
The Matrix pill. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know that I see. I don't know. I think it's just like a way of learning to look at trajectories of technology. I don't know that I have any other particular skill. And also like, yeah, obviously some sort of passion of trying to make separate concepts work in tandem, whatever they happen to be. If it is about forecasting super negative futures, I have no inspiration for that at all. So that in that sense, I'm certainly useless. That would be someone else's pill, I think. But yeah, I think all types of sort of futures that are a lot more negative than today. I mean, I think if they're not technologically advanced, I think that is super hard for me to be inspired by. If you think about like the road as a scenario, there is absolutely no future forecasting of mine in that world. I think I wouldn't want to survive in that world. If it is to think about a world that is super data driven and almost a surveillance state, I think there are pros to that. There are not pros if you're an individualist, which I have been brought up as. So I wouldn't find myself in that. But in terms of creating a sort of future civilization that lasts 3,000 more years, maybe some sort of semi-complex surveillance state will be the road to that, in terms of us not like just wanting to buy into brands of individualism, etc., etc. I think it's a very complicated story that I certainly don't have all the answers to, and probably no one else either. But if you compare sort of authoritarianism of China compared to freedom of the US, it looks like China would be better as a sort of future space age superpower than the US, that would just be like, everyone can do what they want at whichever cost, at whichever amount of resources. I think, I don't know, that is not really a proper answer to anything, but I think understanding that individualism, as much as that's part of who I am, might not be the best route forward. It's also sort of being humble at my own incapacity of falling into the best possible future for the majority, for example. Not saying that's China either, but something that is less about the individual and more about the collective somehow. I couldn't read your full questions, Casper, but let's see if I can see it.
How to separate noise from information?
Well, I mean, that is very tricky, right? I mean, there is certainly things that is noise for everyone, such as advertisement, unless randomly someone has to manages to throw exactly that thing that you forgot to Google that you absolutely need. Every other time, advertisement is noise. So I guess an ad blocker. no, but other than that, I think it's so personal I mean, sometimes what could have been noise just spurs something creative, right? For one person, and the noise of one person is a melody in someone else's ears. I think, yeah, I'm sure there could be generalism going into that and still be functional, but I think it's also not super clear what that noise is, because then if that was beyond your own training, you could meditate, maybe that helps. But in terms of technology, I think I mean, who's going to then create the filter that is the right filter? Isn't that already authoritarian in that concept? That would be my reply anyways.
Thank you.
Cool.
What is your favorite movie?
I don't think I have as solid a favorite movie as I have books, actually. But
You are a living movie.
It doesn't always feel like that to me, for sure. It feels like, yeah, no, I don't really have a favorite movie, I think, as such. One favorite movie, but that is actually a much better book, but the movie is pretty good. I really like the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, because it has this sort of mix of technology and goofiness, and doesn't want to explain the technology one bit. It really is just like, this is is run on impossibility or improbability and stuff like that. I don't know. It's fun for a goofy thing, I think. But no, I absolutely don't have a favorite one. That is not my favorite movie. But I like movies that are sort of have some tricky concept to a degree, where I have friends that tell me that, like, I'm never listening to you because you can get so into a concept that the rest of the movie can be terrible and you still love it. So yeah, I think I'm not the best person to ask, probably. I'm obsessed with movies about time travel, not because they normally show anything interesting about technology, but it's just something about making it more complicated with timelines and stuff. I'm a bit of an addict to complicated things, which isn't really always to my favor, I'm sure. But I can say the least things I like in movies, I identify so much with the negative emotion in movies. So if it's a lot of stressful moments, or super like weird people lying obviously and stuff like this, that really makes me want to crawl out of the skin. Yeah, I saw Predestination, actually. The Jacket is a pretty cool sci-fi movie from like 10 years ago or something. I don't know. Sorry for a terrible answer about the movie.
No. As like, I like your extended answers to like your extended reality.
Oh, yeah.
So, well, I think that like we can ask endless questions, but perhaps it's also good to wrap up this day.
Oh yeah, this was a long day for everyone, I assume.
Yeah. Thank you, Nandi, so much for your time and for being such an endless inspiration.
Well, I don't know if I'm an endless inspiration, but if I inspire someone, that's all good. And if you need some thoughts on the way once you're in your projects, you could contact me. If everyone does, I might not answer everyone, but happy to see if I can contribute somewhere.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Ciao, ciao.
Ciao.
People just stay in for a second, because I have an announcement to make. So we are basically collaborating with the Digital African Festival, African Digital Innovation Festival, that basically started in the 20th of October, and it will go until the 20th of November. And Hyper Island got some seats. So we will create a list of some events, and there are just 25 seats. So I will soon send in a wish list for whoever wants to join and participate. If we have more than 25 people, that's okay. And then we will try to see how we can accommodate everyone. I'm saying this because the first event is already tomorrow at 10:15 in the morning. It's a new media business of heritage stories, hack your culture panel discussion. It's already in the calendar. So just check the URL and then you can see all the information. That's it. So just stay tuned for the wish list. And thank you all for today.
Thank you. And remember to sign up for the workshop tomorrow if you're interested in the performative arts or techniques with Andrew and Casper. So the deadline is midnight, so sign up if you are interested.
Is
And
it the
that's it
same
from-
thing that's on Wednesday?